Hello and welcome to our second preview video for the Jurassic Park card game. I highly recommend if you didn't see the first one, you watch that one first because I explained more about the base idea of the game in that video and I'm not going to repeat myself here. Instead, in this video, we're just going to have a few quick card previews. It's going to be a little bit shorter than the last one, less cards and less explanation of how the game works in the front end anyway. So yeah, we'll just get into it. What we're going to go through today are going to be employees. So employees are one of the three subtypes of assets, and assets represent persistent cards that stay in your park on the table over the course of the game and provide some continuous bonus. The other two types of assets are facilities and paddock upgrades. And paddock upgrades are assets that apply specifically to a single paddock and then affect the species in that paddock or the park in the direction of that paddock. So they may affect adjacent paddocks, adjacent species sometimes. So there's an element of like how you design your park with paddock upgrades. Facilities, on the other hand, represent other structures in your park that aren't part of like the tour. So like the visitor center or the innovation center, those are facilities because they aren't specifically tied to like the individual dinosaurs being displayed. The big thing that sets employees apart from facilities is that employees have a payroll cost where facilities and paddock upgrades have a expense cost. Expense is a single upfront cost to build something, whereas payroll is a continuous fee you have to pay to support that employee in your park. So the first one we'll get through today for employees is Alan Grant here. And we'll also be seeing Sattler and Malcolm for the original main trio. Also coming back in Dominion, so it seemed appropriate to cover them all in one video. Now some other important details of employees to note here. You would see main card type here is the first trait, asset, second trait, or whatever you want to call these. I don't have an official term for them yet. I'll have to come up with a good all over. I have like terms for subtypes of these. Like when you're talking about a species card, it's the diet and then the clade for what species subtypes. But I need like an overall umbrella term just to refer to them in the rules as. I just don't really have it yet. It hasn't really mattered because I haven't had to write up the rules document. It's not mattered for card design so far. But yeah, asset with a subtype of employee. And all employees have a role. Alan Grant here is a paleontologist. And the way roles work is it's pretty simple. It's just that you can only have one employee fulfilling a given role at a time. So if I have Alan Grant in my park, as my paleontologist, if I want to hire a new paleontologist, I'd have to replace Grant if I wanted to do so. And that's just to have some different, flavor to the kind of jobs these characters provide, and to also have it so that sometimes characters are mutually exclusive in a way that if you could combine them together, it'd be too strong, or if you combine them together, there'd be too much overlap between the effects. You gotta pick A or pick B and decide from there. The most important role we'll see in the card game eventually is the CEOs. And so the CEOs are the rare employees. And I've decided, by the way, that I'm going to rename the rare cards as headliners. So you get one headliner per chaos number in your deck. So the CEOs will all be headliner employees. So you can only ever have one of them because they're headliners, but you can also only ever have one in play because they're CEOs. It's a redundancy there in that case, but it's a flavorful redundancy, so I like it. I also should mention the chaos number up here in the corner. This is a placeholder. These numbers are not finalized for like the proper beta release. Basically, what's going on here is a little peek behind the curtain. My previous iteration of the game, I changed between the previous iteration and this upcoming beta release. The biggest change is just the structure of the deck. I decided the original deck had 5 numbers in it and 15 cards per number, and I decided that was a little clunky and it would be better as 6 numbers and 10 per number. So changing from 75 card decks to 60 card decks. But that requires me to change the numbers on all the cards. And so for the purpose of my own internal playtesting, I haven't adjusted the numbers, except for adding the new number, which means that when you actually see these cards in the full beta version, the chaos number might change to what I feel makes more sense. So Grant, all employees will have the same chaos number because they all take up the same slot in the deck, but it may not be 2. And yeah, Grant, as a paleontologist, he reduces the rarity cost of every species you clone. So all that means is when you clone a new species, you get a -3 revenue reduction on the cost to clone it. Rarity is just the special name for the cost of for a species. It effectively functions the same way as expense does for like facilities and paddock upgrades. Now, Grant's fairly simple character concept here, but he's effective, right? He's a pretty heavy cost reduction, but it's only relevant as long as you're adding new species. And as soon as you're not really taking advantage of that 3 expense reduction, the three revenue reduction on your cloning cost, the payroll becomes prohibitive. So you got to kind of like bring Grant in when you're really expanding the park, and then let him go when your park is kind of stable and you're just building a population. But as long as you're bringing in a new species every other turn, Grant provides money in effect, because you'll be paying $1 a turn and saving $3 every other turn, basically. Then the second one we'll reveal here is Sattler, Dr. Ellie Sattler. And so she takes up an entirely different niche. Her role is a consultant, and consultant is kind of a catch-all role in a sense. Basically, there's a lot of like central park operation stuff that has roles like paleontologists, geneticists, CEOs, operations, which is, you know, your guy in the chair or in the control room. But then there's some other characters that show up in the series that aren't, you know, they don't really have a particular role within the structure of the park, right? They're more of an outsider bringing some of their own specialty to the situation, and Ellie, as a paleobotanist, falls into that niche, right? There's not many paleobotanists that show up other than Ellie and all of the extended lore. Maybe none. I'm not sure if there's really any other paleobotanists in like the comic books or anything, but she's got a very special role. So making her a paleobotanist wouldn't make much sense, because she'd only ever really be the only one. So thus she falls into the role of a consultant, which is also her role within Jurassic Park, right? Grant, Malcolm, and Sattler show up as consultants to the park in a sense. More like an evaluation team, I guess, but you know, it's kind of the same thing. And what Ellie Sattler does for you when you have her on your payroll in your park is she specifically protects all your species from being poisoned by West Indian lilac. That's a very narrow, very particular effect. With Grant, we saw a very broad effect, and here we see a very particular flavorful effect. There's not too many effects in the game that get so specific that they get down to a single card like West Indian lilac in this Ellie Sattler interaction, but it felt really, really thematic, so I really wanted to do that, and I liked it, so I kept it in there. And she has the second, more broadly applying ability here of having a chance to cure a disease in the park. So the way this works is you get 1 action a turn, which can be an action card, which I have previously referred to as operations, and I've actually turned back from that. Action is a shorter word than operations, and thus it fits better in card text box. So operations is a defunct term. That was a new term that I brought in for this beta version, and then I immediately cut it out. And unfortunately, the narrow window of time where I was using it was when I made that first preview video. But we're back to action. So her action here involves pulling chaos. So you flip the top card of the deck, you check the number up in the corner. Ellie Sattler here is chaos 2, like all other employees currently are. And then you end up trashing a disease in your park with a chaos effect value equal to the chaos you pulled. So if you flip over a chaos of 2, you look for a disease in the park that has a matching chaos effect trigger of 2, and then that would be trash, discarded, and then it would effectively not, the dinosaur wouldn't be sick anymore. Of course, one of Ellie's big contributions in the original Jurassic Park is figuring out what's wrong with the Triceratops, and this is like the West Indian lilac. This is also referencing that moment, but it also kind of keeps her tied to that paleobotany theme. Diet and disease are heavily interconnected, especially in Jurassic Park and in this card game. So yeah, and it's probably relevant to bring up the point here that all diseases have a chaos effect. Every disease in the game has a chance for itself to be cleared naturally. A dinosaur can recover from being sick. And that's represented by these chaos effect pulls, which are automatic pulls to see if it clears. So basically, Ellie Sattler is allowing you to spend your action to take an extra chance to clear a disease out of the park. And lastly, we have Ian Malcolm. Ian Malcolm, another consultant, currently planned as the only other consultant in the first release, along with Sattler, of course. And Ian Malcolm, obviously, has an effect that ties into chaos. Particularly, Ian Malcolm allows you to manipulate the chaos. You flip a card, Sattler, for instance, with a chaos of 2. Malcolm will allow you to add 1 to that, turn it into a 3. And then you resolve whatever effect you're pulling that chaos for, be it a chaos effect or just a chaos pull like Sattler's ability. And so that's a fairly powerful effect, especially if you build the deck around Malcolm's effect. But even in a deck that isn't specialized in it, it's a relevant effect. Anytime a dinosaur escapes, that's a chaos pull. And there's a lot of chaos effect triggers in the game too, which are chaos pulls. So yeah, even if your deck's not specialized in Malcolm's effect, it's still very relevant to every player who decides to use them. So yeah, those are the 3 previews for this video. Not going to show any more yet. I might alternate between some longer form ones and some shorter form ones. We'll experiment with how we want to do these previews. But I felt that these 3 belong together in a preview set. If you saw the Reddit thread I made when I made the first video, you would have already seen Alan Grant. So there's, that redundancy there. But, I had to include him in this preview thing. And some people, if you're on YouTube only, might not have seen the Reddit post. You wouldn't have seen Grant yet. But yes, yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. Oh, and I should mention one other thing. Payroll, not always one. There are employees that are more expensive than these 3. 1 is the most common, though. But just another detail for you. Oh, and I see that the border here on Alan Grant needs to be properly recolored. It's slightly dimmer than the black behind the name bar. That's a problem with the older iteration of cards, and I seem to have missed it. The contrast on my monitor I designed these on is not as good, apparently. I thought I had fixed it here, but I didn't make it dark enough. It's good on these. It's weird that I messed it up on just the one, but this one was the Reddit preview, and these ones were the ones I updated the border color before I did this video, so that's why it's different. Not that you probably care, not that you might even notice that, but, well, there it is.